Okay, so now let's talk about short-run and long-run production. Okay, about short-run and long-run production based on this function. Okay? In the short run, as I said, you have this production function, which is Q equals F of L and some fixed K bar. In the short run, there's some fixed K bar. So think of this as you are a firm, you're making some good. You have committed to a level of capital input. You've built your plants, you've bought your machines. You've got those machines are on several-year leases, or you've bought them. The plant is this big new gleaning plant. You're not going to change that tomorrow, the next day, or the next month. The workers, but now you got to decide how many workers to hire. You can ramp up or ramp down workers. Okay? So basically, that's your decision. Is you're trying to decide, given the machines I have, how many workers do I hire? That's your short-run decision. Okay? And in doing so, you're going to focus on something we call the marginal product of labor. The marginal product of labor is the change in output per unit change in labor holding capital fixed in the short run. The marginal product of labor is going to be the change in quantity produced for a given change in labor holding capital fixed. That's going to be your short-run marginal product of labor. Okay? And we are going to assume that that is generally diminishing. We're going to assume that holding capital fixed, each additional laborer increases quantity by less and less. In other words, we're going to say it's a diminishing marginal product. Much like we had diminishing marginal utility, but a very different logic. Diminishing marginal utility was because each pizza you were fuller and fuller, it meant less and less to you. This isn't about taste. This is about technology, which is that basically, with the amount of capital fixed, we think of each additional worker as adding less because basically the machines are used up. There's less and less for the worker to do. So the example we often think of is digging a hole. The notion, think of it digging a hole. In that case, let's say your capital is your shovel, okay? And you have that capital's fixed. You can't go get another shovel, okay? Now you have the first worker, and they dig that hole, and they're using that shovel to dig the hole. Now you add a second worker. Now that second worker can help, because the first worker can take breaks, they can alternate. But almost certainly the second worker isn't going to produce as much as going from 0 to 1 worker. 0 to 1 worker, you dig a very fast hole. The second worker will help some. The third worker could help too, but even less. By the time you add a 10th worker, there's only so many breaks people can take. Okay, you're not adding that much help. So given that you've got one shovel, each additional worker does less and less. So it's diminishing just like your marginal utilities. Once again, it's not because you're getting full. In some sense, it's like you're getting full. It's like the capital is getting full. Okay? There's a certain amount of capital, and each additional worker does less and less. Okay? So the key is to remember that this part, that you're holding capital constant. Given there's only a certain amount of capital to work with, the marginal product of labor will generally be diminishing. Now, not always. There can be ranges where it's increasing. That second worker can complement the first worker and actually increase productivity. But in the range we'll typically work, we think of it as diminishing in the short run. We think the marginal product of labor is diminishing in the short run because capital is fixed. Okay? Questions about that? Okay. As some of you may remember, I had my mother here last week, and she said she thought it was hilarious because she said what I'd do is I'd go, okay, are there any questions? All right, moving on. So she thought I should leave more time when I ask for questions for you guys to actually respond. So that's my mother's advice to me. So please, if you have questions, don't be afraid. Okay, so now, okay, any questions about that, seriously? Okay, now let's move on to the long run. In the long run, everything is variable. So now the firm faces a decision over its input mix. In the short run, think of coming into the short run as the capital being decided. Now I just decide how many workers to hire. In the long run, I'm jointly optimizing the number of buildings and the number of workers, the amount of capital and the number of workers. Okay? So now it looks just like what we did with consumer choice. We jointly optimize over pizza and movies. Now we're going to jointly optimize over capital and labor. Okay? We're going to come in and decide how we want to choose between these two. Indeed, why don't we pose a production function in a pretty similar form? Imagine, pretty familiar form. Imagine my production function is that Q equals the square root of K times L. Okay, pretty familiar looking form that we've worked with before in utility. That the production is a square root of the amount of capital times the amount of labor. Okay? Well, given that, that says that there are for various, if I want to produce a level of quantity, there are various combinations of capital and labor I can choose. Indeed, we might think of similar quantities coming from different capitals and labor. We could draw some curves that are kind of like indifference curves. And we do that in figure 8.1. And in production theory, these are called isoquants. Okay, isoquants are the Firm's indifference curves, if you will. They're the combinations of K and L which yield the same level of output.